What's up, guys? My name is Stephen Melin, and I'm a music composer here to help you take your career to the next level. Today, I want to chat about the best sample libraries and plugins in 2025 that I actually use in every project. And the way I want to do that is to show you two different templates that I have that I actually use on every project. The first one is an empty session. It's going to show you the entire layout inside New Window that I use every single time I open a brand new project. And then the second is my orchestral template. I'm going to walk through the different companies and different plugins that I use and how this might be helpful for you. Even in 2025 with a lot of the older plugins that I use, I think it's going to be super helpful. So let's jump in. All right, so here we are inside my blank session, my empty session, and you'll notice a few things right off the bat that I find incredibly helpful for organizing any information that's going to come into this session. And I'll show you the mixer window in just a second. But you'll notice here on the main editor screen that I already have several marker tracks loaded. I have tracks, sections, and chords. And the purpose of that is at any point while I'm writing music, I can input a brand new marker and I can toss that between my different categories there. And if I'm doing film scoring, I'll also do a time code marker. That's super helpful. I can drag these around as needed. Very, very helpful. And I have a time signature and tempo. And that just helps me right off the bat when I'm starting to write music. I can just jump right in without having to create those unique tracks. And then the only instrument loaded is just a random piano. It just happens to be from Arturia. This is the piano V, the piano 5, and it's not even a great piano, so it's just whatever. But the whole point is to have a sketch piano. That's very important for me as a piano player. As soon as I load a project, I have to be able to write. It's like if you were a sketch artist, an animator, whatever, illustrator, and you had a sketch pad but no pen or pencil. It's like you need something to start writing. That's very helpful for me. But I also have the session organized to only be this small section of music because I can always extend it further, and I have all the toolbars and everything I like visually so that I literally just start writing. It's very important to me. Over here in the mix window, you'll notice that I have a bunch of reverbs preloaded. I've also found that in recent years to be a huge time saver, and it actually makes all of my mixes cleaner because now everything's consistent across the board. So you'll notice that I actually have several reverbs here. The very first one is one you can't buy because I made it. So there's an encouragement for you. You can make your own reverbs. You just have to record a clap or a snap in a space that you want to capture. And then you can use within Cubase or New Window, there's a tool here called Reverbs. And what it does, it's an IR, so an impulse response reverb. So what it means is you can throw in your own wave file of that clap. And what it does is it actually reads everything after the clap, and then you get to use that in your own music, which is so cool. So this is the TomTom studio. This is over in Budapest, Hungary, where I usually record my orchestral instruments. So I finally got wise and said, hey, I should probably capture that reverb and start running my own orchestral instruments through that reverb. Hello. And that's been super cool. And then over here I have Aether. This is 2C Aether by 2C Audio. This is my favorite orchestral hall reverb. It's an old plugin, so you can probably grab it cheap. But this is always been my favorite on Hall 2, 100% wet mix, and then I just send things to it. Over here we have B2. This is like a super duper reverb. It's like a digital reverb, not a real space. But this thing set to 50% mix on the default setting, it adds a lot of life, typically to solo instruments, like a solo violin or a solo vocal. It can add so much warmth and space to an instrument. So that is one I use regularly. ROM, this is a Native Instruments plugin that typically when you run a piano through it, sounds really, really nice. I like the initial default patch here set to 100%. Really, really lovely. And then Valhalla Shimmer, you may have heard of. This is a traditional shimmer effect, which means it adds a 1 octave, and that's what this shift button is for. By default, it does a second octave above what you play, and so it adds this big sound, like this big spacious sound on top of what you play. I've always found that to be really, really nice for anything that is kind of magical sounding. So like in a film score, if you're trying to make, you're trying to score a cinematic sequence in the middle of a woods or something that's very spacious, it just kind of like swims around, right? Not super realistic sounding. And then we have a classic here, the Lexicon Medium Hall. Same thing, I have an IR of that, so I just threw it into the Reverence engine. And then also have Black Hole, the Eventide Black Hole. This is from a guitar pedal. And just do that wave file into there, and now things can really swim. So the way that I route this is I'll take an instrument such as my sketch piano, and I already have this routed. And all I do is in my synths is I pick one of those reverbs, and then I send a certain percentage to it. So you'll notice if I just play my sketch piano dry, it's very intimate and dry. But then as soon as I add that tom-tom, it's a little bit wetter. And then the aether, I like to do both. And then just for argument's sake, let's play around. So if I use B2, you'll see how much it starts to swim. Let's try a different one. Let's do the ROM. Very lovely for very cinematic type moments. Valhalla Shimmer. Hear that upper octave doing its thing. Very nice for very ambient stuff. The Lexicon is another very realistic sounding orchestral hall. But it's a lot. And then Black Hole is super spacey. Good for ambient. Cool, right? And then on my stereo out, there are 3 plugins I use all the time. You might want to consider using as well. The first one is actually the built-in EQ for Cubase and New Window. Lots of DAWs have these. And this is simply a 30 band EQ. I like 30 because I can really shape stuff. So there is the Dave Natali mix that I love to use. I've made a whole video about it. Lots of feedback on that video because people just don't believe it's real, or they think it's stupid, or people are raving about it. But what I do is I will start off probably around 3 dB range, 3 dB output. And basically, it's like an M shape curve. And what it does is it kind of scoops out the mids and then boosts back what would be left, which is basically the lows and the highs. And you don't want to overdo this. Like if you really start to crank it, it's just going to sound super awful and like compressed. So I'm not recommending that, but I like to do a little bit of it. And if nothing else, even if it's on 0, I like to use this little meter right here, which you can do with any EQ. But what it does is it tells me the volume of what's coming out of the output. Right now, we're safe because we're well under 0. I like to keep it just below 0. And then just in case something escapes, I use a limiter. You can use whatever limiter you want. But my favorite is Brainworks. It's the BX limiter True Peak. I like this one because you can set your ceiling. I like to do -0.03 dB, which is industry standard. And then I like to have a gain every once in a while. If I'm just doing really quiet music and it's like -10 and it's just not getting anywhere near the normal loudness, I can use this gain knob right here. And it'll add some volume without peaking. 10's probably extreme, but maybe like 3. And you can watch the RMS of what's happening there with the gain reduction and everything. which is nice. I like that I can do all that in one plugin, and that's an inexpensive plugin if you do want to grab it. And then the last one here is Vox and Go Recorder. I've made videos about this as well. This is an ancient plugin that you actually have to convert from 32 to 64-bit. It's that old. It's from like the Windows XP days. But this is how I stream all of my audio. It's how you can hear my voice and then the session right now. It's just all through that plugin. Very useful stuff. And you can see it's just cranking along. So for my live streaming and for all my video recordings, I use that because it helps me capture my DAW audio, and that has been such a lifesaver, especially on Windows. That's just been the way I've done it for many, many years now. So that's my blank session. You'll notice that it is very simple on purpose, but it's very specific, and this is how I can open up a new session and just start writing. And very easily, because I have key commands, I can just start adding stuff. I can open Contact, I can open up Omnisphere, whatever. I can just start loading my instruments one by one. And when I have a new project, this is what I do, is I take my time and I'll go through and I'll start loading through all of my personal sample libraries here, all of these libraries, and I have quite a few. I don't use many of them, to be totally honest, but I can use my search functions to go through, and maybe I need Cinebrass today, so I can type in brass, and I can, boom, pull up the exact instrument that I need for that day. But now let's take a look at the orchestral template that I have and why that is so powerful and useful when writing orchestral music. All right, so here is my orchestral template for New Window. And I forgot to mention in the last section that I record everything at 96 kilohertz, 32-bit float. My reasoning for that is because the industry standard format for delivery is half of that, so 48 kilohertz and 24-bit in the sample rate. The purpose is this allows me to record at a higher fidelity, and then when I mix it down, it just means that the final file is going to be slightly higher quality than if I had started at 48K 24. Here inside my session, this is my orchestral template, and it's quite simple on purpose. It's important for me when I write to have a short articulation and a long articulation for not even every single possible instrument, but all of the typical or classic instruments in an orchestra. And because I've been doing this for so long, my templates have actually gotten simpler, not more complicated, because most of what I write these days, I record with a live orchestra. It's important for me to actually write to the exact ensemble size, and that actually changes the way that I write and the sound and the quality of what I write. So for example, I don't just write for trumpets, I write for 4 trumpet players, because I know that when I typically record with the Budapest Symphony Orchestra in Hungary, it's going to be 4 trumpet players. It's going to be 6 horn players. It's going to be between 2 and 3 trombones. And the reason it's 2 to 3 is because I can put one of those trombones as a bass trombone, and then I have 1 tuba player. So I put those in parentheses because that's the exact number of people I know are going to be playing that instrument. The same goes down for the woodwinds. I always have 3 woodwind players on each part. Sometimes we'll double with piccolo, so that's why the flutes are 2 to 3. And then moving down to the string ensemble, I like to have 34 players. And so I like to divide that up as 10 violin 1s, 8 violin 2s, 6 violas, 6 cellos, and 4 double basses. And then when I record choir, I like to do 20 women and 20 men. So that actually changes and eliminates a whole bunch of sample libraries that wouldn't fall into those categories. Because for me, it's essential that when I play this patch, it sounds like 4 trumpets are playing, not 20 trumpets are playing. When I play my horn ensemble, this is probably the worst of them all. It needs to sound like 6 horns. It doesn't need to sound like 20 or 30 or crazy stuff like that. And strings actually get a really, really bad rep for this, that when you use an ensemble patch, that is not a realistic sound. That does not sound like 34 people playing. What it would really sound like is probably more like this. What a big difference, right? Because you got to think with these ensemble patches, it's actually a whole lot more samples playing when you hit the key, because it's all the instruments playing that note. And these are really large ensemble sizes, like 50 or 100 people versus the 6 cellos playing that little line, right? It's just, you got to put it in perspective, right? And then below that, I have my percussion here. So piano, harp, toms, timpani, glockenspiel, xylophone, marimba, piatti, which are crash cymbals, gong, tubular bells, and snare. And in my mixer window, this is my template, but I'm going to change this per project. For example, sometimes I might want the snare to feel closer, so I might change the amount of reverb. The same goes for all of these instruments. This is why I do my reverb synths, like I described in the empty session. All of that's still here. Every time I have a new project, I will just dial in each of the instruments, and it looks like in this particular session, almost none of my strings have reverb on them. It's just kind of the natural baked into the sample libraries themselves. And just like before, you see in my stereo out, it's just that EQ we talked about. It's not even on. I have my limiter set to -0.3 dB and my Vox and Go recorder as expected so that you can hear the audio now. So let's take a look at the actual instruments that I'm using for each of these instruments. Trumpets. These are my 4 trumpets. Pretty much for all of my brass, I'm using 8 Dio. This is the New Century Ensemble Brass. I'll show you what that looks like. This is a contact instrument that you have to load it through the Files menu. But right here, you have all your breakdown of your horns, your trombones, and your trumpets. They don't have tubas, which kind of stinks. I have to use tuba from somewhere else, and bass trombones for someone else. But I've always found these to be the most realistic, classic-sounding brass. And I don't even like to load the big patches because they're massive patches and they're slow to load. So instead, I like to go into the individual articulations. And so for this one, 4 trumpets, I know exactly what I'm going to get. And then I'll pick the exact articulation that I need. This is the short patch, Staccato. Absolutely wonderful for fast passages. Love it. And then what I also love about this particular library is they have poly legato patches, or what they call legato chordal, which means you can play 2 notes legato. Which is amazing for orchestral writing because I don't have to load multiple patches just to play legato. So, for example, but in the instance that I do, in fact, need to actually write separate parts, I can use a trumpet's sustain patch by the same library. It's not going to be as pretty. This is more for that type of writing. So it's similar, but at least it's in the same family. Same goes for the horns. I really like to use the Staccato. I already have all my volumes dialed in to be pretty quiet. Love that patch. Same thing goes for the sustains. For trombones, same thing. These are 3 trombones. Trombones, the chordal or the polylegato. Good for playing octaves, which is a pretty typical trombone thing to do. For the bass trombone, this isn't my favorite, but it is the one I kind of lean towards. This is from Session Horns Pro. They have a bass trombone all by himself. And it's nice and quiet. If I turn it up. I like having a bass trombone in the mix because I can double it with tuba, and they pair well together. And then for the tuba, I'm using Cinebrass Pro. It has a tuba solo. I've always found that to be very effective. Here's the tuba legato. So in a typical pairing, I would probably do bass trombone and that together. And I would probably also maybe double that with the bassoons and the double basses all together. Sounds great. And this is why I do it this way, so that I can very easily pair stuff together. Moving on to the winds, I think it's important to have some kind of woodwind sound effects. So I like to use Cage. This is from ADO. Anytime I need like horror type effects for brass woodwinds or strings, Cage is a really great bundle based on John Cage. It's just a whole bunch of effects. You could go to town on all of these. They're all mod wheel controlled. Really cool. Strings do the same thing, by the way, since we're talking about it. And they have some for brass. So these things are really fun to pair together. And use the mod wheel to ride them. Amazing. And then I think it's important to have an ensemble patch for woodwinds and an ensemble patch for strings, because so much of orchestration is starting with a chord and then splitting it into the individual instruments. So it's very common for me to take a patch like this. This is the Woodwind Ensemble from Palette Symphonic Sketchpad from Red Room Audio, which has now merged with Impact Soundworks. So you'll have to go to the Impact Soundworks website to find anything Palette related. But it's just a very simple patch. It's very small footprint. I love how it's the full range of woodwinds. And I can just easily write with it. And it already has the right balance because it's 3 woodwinds per section, per instrument. And then from there, I can take, let's just take that little blob right there. I can take that and I could very easily start separating it out into the various parts. So let's try moving those into, I don't know, the oboes and clarinets maybe. Cool. That's the idea, is we can take something from the ensemble and then we can, parse it out into the various parts there. So each of these libraries here for woodwinds, I've gone all over the place with woodwinds. Orchestral Tools has a nice piccolo that I like. And I have it really low in the mix. It's simple, but it gets the job done. And then over here for flutes, oboes, clarinets, and bassoons, I'm currently using a lot of Woodwind Ensemble Symphony series, which is actually a Native Instruments patch. I found with woodwinds, so many companies have these really, really heavy patches, and I just can't work with that. I don't work with things that slow my computer down. It has to sound good and be a small footprint. It's got to sound good, I'm happy with that. Same goes for all of these. These are all from the same family there. All right, moving on to strings. I'm not as particular about the ensemble patches because they're not typically the patches I'm going to use. They're just kind of placeholders. But I have a huge recommendation. If you do not yet have the free Sign Player from Orchestral Tools, they have a ton of great free instruments, including Helix, which is actually probably my most used patch, which is crazy because it's free. So Helix right here, it's only 2 patches. It's whole string ensemble, so it's spiccatos and sustain. So right now I have the spiccatos loaded. It's amazing. Use it all the time. It's a great writing tool. And I can take that and sort it out. But also their, for if you're going to use Helix, you can also use their sustain patch. It's very sluggish, but I like that about it. Ride the mod wheel. So pretty. But then for the individuals, I use a whole lot of orchestral tools for strings. So using that same Sign Player. It kind of depends on the day, but almost all of these are coming from Metropolis Arc 1 in particular. I do have all of them, but Metropolis Arc 1 has all of the basics, which is typically what I tend to use. So it's from this Fickenstein high strings and Wolfenstein low strings. That's where I'm pulling all this from. To me, it has a lot of grit. So when I'm not using Metropolis Arc, I also like to use TSS, which is Tokyo Scoring Strings. And this is from Impact Soundworks. It's kind of a hit or miss where I would tend to use it for the legato patches. Because so much of our writing, specifically for video games, right? So much of what we do as game composers has a Japanese tint to it. So it's nice to use the Tokyo Scoring Strings, which is the ensemble used in all of our favorite games. I think it's absolutely gorgeous. It has a lot of trouble with landing the timing, so sometimes I'll just use a different patch, but if quality is my utmost concern and I have a lot of time to play with it, then yeah, it's going to be Tokyo Scoring Strings. Can't beat that. And that's true of all of these patches here. And occasionally I will still use, like right here, I think for low strings, for short strings, Adagietto is still one of the best. One of the cheapest too. This is from 8DO as well. I've just found when you mix cellos and basses in the low register, it's just unbeatable to really crank these. This spiccato. It's just so clean, but still has that grit. I also like that they have this speed knob here, which is actually compression, or at the very least, it's like time compression, where if you have the speed knob all the way down, it's going to keep all the original recordings, which means it's going to be slightly off beat because the bow is not perfect. A lot of grit, which is fine. If you're playing slow, it's actually better. But if you're playing faster, then it's nice to crank this up to maybe 50%. Moving on to the choirs. So for choir rise effects, to me, there's nothing that compares with 2D Vox. This is from Sonokinetic. I don't use a lot of their libraries, but this is one that knocks it out of the park because it just has the craziest, I like to call them the Dark Souls sounds. It's all the weird aleatoric boss stuff. Very Ligeti inspired. So just a bunch of effects. A lot of weird. This kind of atonal stuff. Makes me think of Zelda, Majora's Mask a lot. I love this stuff. And there's menus within menus here that you can just change all the shapes and sizes. It's so cool. So I use that a ton. If I'm using choir, I'm going to be using that for anything intense like boss battles and stuff like that. But besides that, there are two libraries that I use exclusively for choir because they are, bar none, is the best thing out there. One is called Freya for all the females, and this is by Strazov Sampling. It's about the only thing I use from Strazov, but it is the quality is so much better than everything else out there. So pretty, so good. And they have text versions and vowels. So for the ahs, I'll typically do that. Same thing for the min, same company, Strazov Sampling, they have Wotan. So what I'll typically do is I'll play both at the same time like this. Like that. And they have text versions as well, and you can go to town on choosing your different text preferences and whatnots. But like always, like to mix these together. That's the kind of stuff that is really good for layering on top of your big orchestral stuff. Moving on, piano. I have a lot of piano libraries because I'm a piano player. But there's one piano that I think rules them all when it comes to the orchestral context, and it's actually what we mentioned earlier. It's Palette, Symphonic Sketchpad by Red Room Audio. Again, once they've now been acquired by Impact Soundworks. It's just the piano. It's patch 16. It's nothing impressive all by itself. It's not something you'd use in a solo piano album. There's other stuff for that. But in an orchestral context, it sounds exactly like it's in the room. Especially when you have strings going and harps going and brass and choir. It has this like delicate, almost gentle it's so pretty when compared with the other stuff. And it's all about the context of what are we writing for, right? This next one, I can't even recommend to you because I hired and built this myself. Sorry, but that's just kind of how it goes. Part of being a composer and making your own unique stuff is making your own unique sounds and having your own musicians and your own sample libraries. And here's the thing, I hate every single harp library in existence out there. I've never found one that's like, that's the one that I need. So I just built one. And that's why it sounds so freaking good. Because it caters to my playstyle. I have to do it. So yeah, I hope that that's inspiring to you. If you can't find a library that suits your purposes, go make your own. I know that sounds crazy, but it's totally a thing. And I've done that multiple times before. For my percussion, I tend to lean a couple places. The first is also by Red Room Audio. It's called Saga. They have really nice orchestral ensembles. So for toms. Just like that, really nice. For timpani, I think Museo does it best. So Museo is Cinesample's subscription. They also have a perpetual license that you can buy just one time, and you get access to all of the Cinesample stuff. So we're talking Cine Perc, Cine Winds, Cine Brass, Cine Strings, and a whole bunch of other stuff. I mean, the catalog is insane. I'm not sure if you've ever seen it before, but look at all these things that are included in it. Of special note would be like the Tina Guo, cello stuff. All the Cinebrass is phenomenal. Cineharps is great. Harpsichord. I mean, this stuff is really, really good. The dulcimer and zither are actually phenomenal if you haven't used them. They have a bunch of new stuff in here too. I don't think all of it's amazing, but I think enough of it's amazing that it's can definitely fill a void without having to spend a bunch of money. Anyway, timpani from Cineperc is, I think, the best timpani in the planet. Because it's so clean. And it's actually performed by my favorite percussionist. And then moving on, same thing, Cineperc, Glock, can't beat it. Really can't beat Cineperc for all of this stuff. Marimba, all from Cineperc. Even the crash cymbals, which I use religiously. The gong, all Cineperc. Bells. And the snare. So good. There you have it. It's not that complicated, but those are the sample libraries that I actually use regularly. Now, quick little bonus here. If you're wondering about the synth side of things, here's what I typically do. If I need some synths, I'll go one of three places. I'll pull out a Zebra HZ patch, which is called Dark Zebra. This is for anything very cinematic. You're going to find a whole bunch of good basses in here. Stuff like that. You're going to find a lot of really good like harps. Amazing for film scoring. So, big fan of Zebra. Another really big one is Massive. Great if you understand a little bit about synthesis, because you can go through here and build your own and mix multiple oscillators together. Maybe add some white noise to it. Add your own effects. But if that sounds super boring and not inspiring, you can always go to their sound bank and go to town on all kinds of synthy stuff. This is going to be much cleaner sounds. Probably the most well-known is going to be Omnisphere. Really, really solid. I think most composers use Omnisphere in some way or another. I tend to go here if I'm just looking for synth sounds. Pads is usually a great place. It's not the only one that I use, but So looking for a great all-in-one. So much good stuff in here. Also a really good place to go for synth basses. So there's always going to be one-off instruments that help to make a project unique. And I do have a ton of that kind of stuff, but for the purposes of a template and the purposes of like, what do I actually use all the time? This is it. It's not that complicated. And this is why you don't have to go spend a bunch of money on stuff you don't need. Instead, rather you focus on the bare bones basics, get really good at those things, and then as a project demands something a little bit more interesting, maybe go record some live instruments, or maybe just have a very specific ethnic instrument from a different library. But the point is, you don't need to go crazy with this. Really focus on honing in your template, and that is always going to get you the majority of the way to having a successful project.